teams, it allows for a very significant amount of exchange of information. And it allows us to get to the underlying reasons and bases for our positions rather than just arguing about the language itself, which is oftentimes, it devolves into something that's not terribly productive. And we can wind up spending a lot of time disagreeing when if we actually would take a step back, one step as to why we are striking those positions and why we are making certain recommendations or proposals or counter proposals, we can maybe have a better understanding of where each of us is coming from. So I want to go over that. Oh, got this right in the middle of.
That's because we forgot to start recording
Oh,
immediately.
And then I want to talk a little bit about, and I put the word perceived here because I don't want to make any assumptions, but our team talked a little bit about what we believe your interests are as hopefully a way to segue into having a more robust conversation with you all about, okay, we think we know what your interests are. You articulated some of them in your presentation and you gave some examples. And then some of your folks spoke actually last time during the end of the meeting. But we think that a conversation just about that would actually be very instructive and helpful for us as we attempt to work together and move forward. So let me go over some of the interests that the university has at this point. The first thing is we want to offer a competitive compensation package. And I realize that that may seem surprising that it's our first one, but it's not. We do want to offer a competitive compensation package. And one of the things that we spent so much time talking about was the way that we arrive at that description and the way that we define what that looks like when we talk about comparators and when we talk about what goes into defining a compensation package, what are the pieces, how do you value them? You know, there's a lot of conversation we can have here rather than just, well, we say a compensation package has this value and that makes it competitive. Well, we say it's this. Well, let's actually peel back the onion and talk about what are those pieces of a total compensation package that describe it or define it as being competitive. Obviously, we have a responsibility to remain budgetarily sound. I'm sure you've heard that many times before in bargaining. Just put it in here because it's obviously an explicit interest. We want to include all employees in increase considerations, not necessarily to the exact level, but we just want to make sure that as we go and put a package together, that everyone has been considered. And oftentimes, that's something that a significant portion of defining a proposal or a plan has to take that into account. The next thing is we want to make sure that we acknowledge and respect the impact of increases on non-centrally funded GAs. I know I've had conversation with you all before, and the split is only 54-46. That means that while 54%, the most recent information I got was that while 54% of our GAs are centrally funded, 46% of them are not. And what that means is that there's a lot of things that have to go into adjustments if they are on other, if they're not on central funding. We obviously want to honor the contract regarding workloads and bargaining new language is mutually acceptable. We've had a lot of conversation informally and now maybe a little more formally about workloads and how that works. And obviously there's an interplay between how much work there is to accomplish and how much any work can be done by any one employee. And all of that has an impact on how we identify how much work there is to be done in each unit, so on and so forth. We want to be mindful of that as we move forward. The next thing is we want to overcome operational challenges regarding direct payment of fees. I know that this was something that was, you may remember I was not here, but you may remember having some discussion of fees. This is something that since my arrival on the first day has been brought to me as an interest for the university. We may want to possibly identify a multi-year compensation strategy. Don't interpret that as an offer of a multi-year deal. What I'm saying is that if we have short, medium, and long-term goals, you know, I think the university believes that we need to be deliberate about what those goals are and then translating them into steps. And if it's only a one-year situation, so be it. Again, that's not a commitment to look at a multi-year deal. That's a commitment to saying, look, people can sometimes forget that every one-year successor agreement builds on what happened previously. And depending on how well it is struck, can have significant negative impact on the next successor agreement that we have to attempt to accomplish. So hanging it in a framework of having a multi-year relationship, even if you don't have a multi-year agreement, is something that should be considered. Communicating and executing strategic goals goes right in line with that. And then employee satisfaction and perceived fairness is something that is important to the university. It may not sometimes be something that's articulated at the table as a management interest, but we believe it's a shared interest between both of us. I will say that I'm interested in a more collaborative bargaining process. As a result of a little project that I've been working on, I've had an opportunity to review many, if not most, of the collaborative bargaining documents from the last full book session for all of our unions. And I would say that I think we probably have some collaborative and mutual work to do to try to make the bargaining process maybe more collaborative, maybe a little more transparent. And then finally, and this may be a little pie in the sky, but I think that one of the things that's the most effective as we get to important milestones within the bargaining process, or even at the end of sessions, I'm not saying we necessarily do it today, but I think it's an indication to the management that we represent and also the members that you represent, that if we can get to certain points in bargaining and consider joint messaging regarding our progress and regarding what we've agreed to, it can be a signal, not only to management, but also to your membership that we are working in a way that is meaningful and collaborative, and we're actually getting progressively closer towards getting something accomplished. So those are the interests that we've sort of laid out. I will then share our perspective. Again, the word perceived is important here. This is what I think, or we think your interests are, but we realize it's probably not all of them. So we try to take very careful notes and then just identify what we thought were the 5 biggest takeaways from your proposal. The first one was a significant increase in stipends. We heard that loud and clear. The second thing was you had a compelling interest, and this was just as much at the table as it was from the people who spoke from the floor, address external economic factors through the compensation plan. That is a very complicated and nuanced issue, and we would like to explore that with you. Benchmarking to other institutions, there are a very significant number of ways that you can benchmark. Clearly, you are interested in benchmarking other institutions. We don't necessarily disagree that that's a bad idea. You also requested additional transparency through the bargaining process. I think that is something that we are interested in meeting you with, depending on what those specific questions are. We had some discussion about, I think Sikander, you had mentioned some things about making sure that the budget was made clear, the documents were available to you so you could review them in a meaningful way. I think we want to make whatever documents you want available to you. And then one of the things that you said it kind of as at least what I took was sort of a comment towards the end, but I remembered it and it stuck out in my mind, is that you want to ensure that the demands are translated to the highest level of decision makers within the UF leadership. What that means is really what that comes down to is, are you being heard? Are we coming in here and then we're serving as almost like a concrete wall? You tell us and then we say, okay, we'll tell everybody. And then you're not necessarily left with any faith that has happened and that there's a meaningful strategic interaction between us and the people that are ultimately providing authorship and authorization for us to work at the table. So those were the biggest 5 that we took away from the previous session. I'm sure there are others. We are happy to discuss those with you now or as part of a different framework. But I wanted you to know that we did hear you and we did attempt to understand what we believed your interests were. So this is not to be too idealistic or too ivory tower, but I do think that we have an opportunity to maybe change some things and maybe make things a little bit better. So here's what I would like you to please consider. And that is taking a more interest-based approach to how we reach a deal. And this is why. We've had recent transitions in leadership and people in the table. As you know, I've only been here for about 3 months. I'm excited. It's been great getting to know my team. It's been great getting to know your team. And I think we have an opportunity to continue to build on some of the collaborative efforts we've already started to build. I think more frequent communication, more time interacting, and getting a better understanding of what the issues that you're facing are early on, intervention and working on them informally can provide us with a great opportunity to strengthen our relationship. Obviously, there's additional impending transitions. You just had elections. I know some of you are graduating. You're going to have a changeover in leadership. There's a lot of institutional knowledge and experience that's lost when that happens. So by establishing a stronger framework, which focuses on clear and transparent communication with some education about the process sort of baked in, it can help ease that transition and allow people to not necessarily feel so put upon or having a disproportional power structure at the table, which to some extent, management always has a bit of an advantage at the table to begin with. When you then are faced with people who haven't necessarily done it before, haven't done it very frequently, and are still having procedural questions, it can make it difficult. And that inherently increases distrust and increases concern and criticism at the table. And I think that there's a way to ameliorate that. The other thing, it will obviously increase opportunities for communication, as I talked about, starting with common interests, I think is a great way to talk about how we each prioritize what common underlying components about how we get through this process we have. So again, I would talk about, what do we really want to do is foster a better understanding of each of our positions so that we can increase effectiveness and, quite frankly, not waste time. I understand there's some irony in saying, well, I want to increase the amount of time we spend together, but I also want it to be more effective and more efficient. I believe those things actually go hand in hand together, at least in my experience. So I would put that out for your consideration. So how does that actually work? And obviously, I'm not going to go through this in great detail now, but the whole concept of approaching it this way is that we go through establishing ground rules, we identify topics and issues in a very sort of open-ended way. Nobody gets to say, we're not going to talk about that. And then through a longer process of discussion, we're able to identify what common interests we have or what interests we have that are not in common but need to be addressed. And then we talk about generating options of dealing with each of those components. And then we develop mutually agreeable standards for vetting which of those options is the most agreeable. We evaluate those options against those mutually developed standards. And then slowly over time, we can actually get to closure on each of those individual options. This is the kind of thing that can be done through a facilitated situation, or we can just do it ourselves. I would appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about in greater detail about how it works. If you're open to it, if you're interested, I do think, like I said, because we have such a period of transition right now, I think it could be mutually beneficial to consider it. So I put that on the table for your consideration. One of the things that I had mentioned to you before is I think we have an opportunity here because there's a slight mismatch with regard to the way that the contract is currently constructed in terms of compensation with regard to the budgetary cycle and authorization. So all of the other employee groups are on a cycle with an October 1 implementation. You guys are on a January implementation. I would argue that really kind of puts you at a pretty significant fundamental and systematic disadvantage. And I think that I would recommend, and what you're going to see is that I'm going to recommend that we get you back in line with the other groups so that we're not doing you at a different time than everybody else. Because quite frankly, when the management team goes out for authorization this late in the academic year, it's going to be much more difficult for that part of the process. And the other component, which I raise as a question, and I'm not 100% sure of the impact, but does the current cycle of doing January-based implementations actually disadvantage new hires? And I think there's at least one line of reasoning or logic that would say that it actually does, because sometimes the provisions are written in such a way that you have to be an employee basically in the previous semester. So then the question becomes, so how does that affect employees in this unit versus the other one? So I think there may be something there as well. This is not necessarily something we have to do for this round of, necessarily have to go into this full concept, or we're not saying this is the way we want to do this round of compensation reopener. But I do think that I want to bring it up because we are knocking on the door of going into full book. And so again, I felt it appropriate to bring this up during, an actual bargaining session where we're speaking our bargaining team to your bargaining team about maybe a process by which we can both benefit. It will take, as I said, it is more frequent meetings, and they are longer individual sessions. I'm not going to say it's faster. It's certainly not. It's considerably slower. But in my experience, I do think it's worthy of consideration for reaching a more mutually beneficial agreement without falling into some of the traps that, maybe more traditional, positional, and contentious bargaining sessions do. All right, so what are the actual components of the proposal that you're going to see from us? So obviously, I talked about transition to an interest-based approach, including initial joint training and expanded bargaining sessions. That's not actually part of the agreement. That's something that I just want to put on the table for you. What are the actual nuts and bolts of the proposal you're going to see? Well, the first one is a one-time prorated payment of 3% in consideration of January 1st through September 30th. Now, why is it only January 1 through September 30th? Because what we would like to do is immediately start scheduling bargaining for what would happen starting October 1st. you could almost think of it as sort of a bridge agreement with a commitment to talking about allowing you to reopen next year's compensation early, so you're on schedule with everybody else. And then this is the part which I realize we're going to probably have a lot of questions about, and it may not be something that you like to hear, but I will tell you, this is definitely a significant management interest. One of them is we want to talk about an additional raise of 105% of the fee relief equivalent effective August 1st, so that in the semester of the fall, we can actually eliminate the direct fee payment. And I'm more than happy to get into the exact budgetary reasons for that, but it has been explained to me in no fewer than 3 meetings that that is causing a significant problem in terms of what they call the color of money or the individual components of the budget. So we would like to have some discussion about that. So that is sort of the presentation that we have prepared. Happy to, I don't know if any other member of my team has anything you'd like to offer or clarify. If there's something you feel I left out, please by all means clarify. No, good. So if you all have questions, we're happy to talk about it, or if instead you'd like to, if you guys want to talk, or however you want to do it.
Do you folks have a copy of the actual counter proposal?
It is right here.
And do you have it electronically as well?
Yeah, I can email it to you.
Okay.
A new folder, I didn't want to open from it.
I just pulled them out of the box right before I came here.
Maybe if you folks on the bargaining team have any direct questions right now, just from the presentation, or if anyone in the audience or on Zoom has direct questions, perhaps we can spend a little bit of time asking the US bargaining team. And if not, we can go to debrief to discuss the counter proposal, which I'll pull up on Zoom in a moment.
So is the reason for like the language in terms of percentage of the fees is because like the fees are different for everyone? Is that the reason why you've written?
I'm sorry, I was looking at this. I wasn't listening. Go ahead.
So,
Say that.
the first one is 10.3A. Says every employee shall receive an annual raise equivalent of 105% of the transportation fees.
Right.
So why is it written in that kind of percent? Is it because the fees are the amount that is paid by each person is different?
It could be different, exactly.
And what and on what basis are the fees calculated? Is that based on your salary, or is that based on?
It's based on the expected fee payment that you would make as a student.
Right, I guess what I'm asking is, so why is there a difference in like the fees that are?
They may not all be registered with the same number of credits.
I see.
Because some programs require, my understanding after talking to the grad school is that some programs require more credits than others. So like if.
So then.
But the fee relief is still only allocated for those 9 credit hours, the same for the tuition waiver, as from my understanding.
Right.
So only people with 9 credits would be.
Well, no, everyone who has the. Sorry, everyone who has the tuition remission would have the fee relief up to 9 credits, no more than 9 credits, even if they're registered for 12.
I see.
But I'm wondering. Is the reason that the percentage stayed in is because, again, with.
So
There
if you
being.
took if you took like a different credit, it's like the fee that you pay is different?
No.
Is that-
The only people from my understanding who pay a different number of fees are people who are qualified for reduced course loads and have to register for 6 credits. I think everyone else is only eligible for 9 credit hours of fee relief.
Right, but we wouldn't give someone 9, we wouldn't give them the equivalent of nine credits of fee relief if they're only taking 6 credits.
Yes,
I see. Okay, so then could we, yeah, go ahead.
so that's why it's in a percentage as opposed to a flat amount. Yeah.
Correct.
We've had that discussion previously when the fee relief was like allocated late, is that
Mhm.
people actually got wrong amounts. Some
Right.
people got more amount. My question is the percentage, that makes sense. Would the percentage also remain set at 105 in case there are increases to the fees? Because again, that is one of our things, which is that if the health and transportation fees were increased, there's no set amount, so.
I
the
get what you're
percentage.
saying. Yeah, that's something we could talk about.
Okay,
We could talk about what would happen like in the future if there
Yeah.
was, because the way we've written this is a one-time fee to obviously move it back.
okay,
Obviously, that's I mean, there's no, hey, why are you doing this? It's because we want to move it back.
Yes.
Because we are specifically prohibited from using state money. We cannot use state money to pay those fees.
yeah, again, I'm just, with the way in which, I know that the legislature has put barriers to raising tuition costs. I know fees has been a way to sort of make up for some of that cost, and so that's one of our fears, is that this
Sure.
may, be slightly above what we are making, but if that increases significantly in the next year, the year after, or 5
Right.
years from now, that could be a barrier.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we could continue to talk about. If there's a way that we could attempt to, deal with that in a
Mhm.
meaningful way, again, because as it stands now with no change, we would be doing that portion of the fees anyway. So
Yes.
I believe that there's probably some flexibility in terms of how we structure that.
Okay.
Again, because like I said, the primary component for the charge that we've been given is we have to start talking about changing the way this is done. So.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you get the chance to email over the election?
I was in the middle of doing that and then I wanted to pay attention to what Secretary said. I'm sorry.
No worries. I appreciate it.
Article 25.2.
That is the article that deals with the limit of reopening.
Yes, to January, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pull that up. And I can chat as well. Nope, that's not
It should be on its way to you through
You're
the ether.
Thank you.
on the Wi-Fi here, who knows when we'll get it, so,
Sometime next week, maybe.
let's see, pulling up the CBA now, just to read that.
I think it's probably more of a procedural requirement,
Mhm.
but again, I didn't want to issue a proposal that would be procedurally,
Yeah.
not appropriate based on what the CBA currently says.
Yeah, and again, I think it is weird that it goes into effect in January, but we are limited to bargaining it until January.
Frankly, I think that the 25.2, and I don't know, but I think it's possible that the 25.2 provision may have been a provision that didn't change when all the other stuff changed to January 1, because in my mind, those timelines don't seem to work well together.
Yeah.
And that's what we've had a lot of discussion about, is it seems that some of it is based on a timeline that's more in line with the academic year, but some of the timelines are based more on the calendar year.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a source of confusion, and we think that there's benefit to maybe not having that be the case. And frankly, I think it's financially going to be to GAU's advantage at the table to be in line with everybody else, as opposed to waiting until they're all done. And then January 1 rolls around, it's like, okay, so can we do ours now? And everybody else is already finished.
They're pulling it up now.
Sorry, yeah.
It's fun.
I'm
Oh,
going,
did the email actually arrive?
yeah,
That's good.
it just got them.
Um,
Okay, so for folks on Zoom, can someone confirm that you can see? Actually, we also need to turn the volume up for the Zoom folks now that we are no longer doing the presentation.
Why 3%, if you don't mind my asking, for the one-time payment for the January through September?
So quite frankly, that was what was given to everyone to try to buy us time as a bridge agreement. That is what everybody else got. So what our methodology was, you would not be disadvantaged to what was given to all the other employees. In an attempt to fill in what probably we could have just unilaterally given you, because there's a provision that we could just do it.
Mhm.
But obviously that's not in the spirit of doing things collectively. It would have filled in what otherwise it would have been likely that you would have gotten had we just done it on our own. And then sort of keep you in line with everyone else while we have more robust conversation in line with what it would mean for maybe more comprehensive
Yeah.
bargaining.
I mean, so something we've talked about at previous sessions is just that the percentage is usually done in an attempt to make things more equitable.
Mhm.
But it really does financially hurt those who are at the lowest end,
Mhm.
which are the ones that we are primarily concerned with, right?
Mhm.
3% for me at 17,000 is a lot less than someone maybe in, electrical engineering, who's making significantly more. Which is why in the past we have preferred, and I'm sure Brooke and Tom can say this, flat fees, because again, like, I'm sorry, yeah. So if that's something that you guys are amenable to, like, I know there is a spirit of keeping everything in line with like staff and faculty, but usually with staff and faculty, we're dealing with something that potentially could be more equitable than GA pay.
Yeah, and I think that looking at the last deal that you all struck, it was dealt with more of in that fashion. And again, we know that this can take some time, and we've scheduled multiple sessions. I think what our hope was that we can, again, maybe reach a bridge agreement relatively quickly, so that we can then have a more comprehensive discussion and maybe do something that's more, no commitment, but something that is more thoughtful, nuanced, maybe is disproportional on one end or the other, but let's have all the fundamental conversations about how we value each of those components of a compensation plan when we have the framework for having long, not necessarily long, but more robust conversation about this group of people, this group of, talking about each of the individual groups of folks and how they're affected.
No, I need to read through.
Yeah.
I think, and then, so perhaps we could, unless there's anyone in the audience have any questions.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
Yes, I can hear you. And
Hi. My name is Robert. I have a question about the minimum stipend at 17,000. I see is what the counteroffer is, and I'm wondering why that is. We offered at 29,000, and so that's quite a difference. And so, do you have an explanation for why your counteroffer is so low?
Yeah, I will. I'm more than happy to speak to that. I will say that when we received your proposal, it was an indication to me that we need to have conversations about how we value proposals. Quite frankly, I've been doing this quite a while. I've never seen a request for a 78.6% increase ever in any group for any union I've ever bargained with. So to me, I feel like we got to talk about how is that, because obviously there's a thought that, well, we'll just ask for a lot and then we're going to be somewhere between where they are and a lot. And that's a very traditional way of approaching it. I have many more questions about how we value an offer of 78% increase in a single year coming off of what was considered by even your bargaining team to be the largest raise you'd ever gotten. Again, that's not to discount your request, but I think that's going to take a lot more understanding of how you arrived at that number, other than saying, well, that's what they're doing up in Michigan. Because that's not going to be enough to convince a lot of the stakeholders on the management side that in and of itself is going to be there. I think we need to develop more understanding of how you arrived at the number.
right.
We arrived. Oh,
Go ahead, Robert.
okay. Just to speak to that a little bit, we arrived through that number through analysis. For example, the cost of living right now, based on this number, you're asking GAs to live on $2,100 a month. And do you know how much rent is, for example, which would be half of that, more than half of that, depending on the options that we have. And so there's reason behind this. And so you are telling GAs to live on crumbs. And so I know if anybody else wants to jump in here, feel free, but there's definitely logic behind the number that we provided.
Yeah, I definitely need to take more time to look over the counter proposal that we've gotten. But one thing that struck me I totally agree that we need to have a more open and honest conversation about, one, how we get to these numbers, what we value. But I do think that based on our last presentation, that the main thing that we are valuing is a living wage. And that's been the argument for as long as we've been bargaining with UF. And to know that on UF's interest, the wellness and employee and fairness of how employees are treated was listed so low on the priorities really does speak to why we're here today. Yeah, I'm totally in agreement where we do need to be having more communications, I think, because there is a huge opportunity here with new turnover and with new leadership to have dialogue and get us both to where we want to be. But this is more than a business proposal. And we've made this clear time and time again, where we are living on the bare minimum and struggling. And it's contentious for that reason, because this is what we do. We work and we need to live. We need to live outside of academia, and steering the conversation away from that more towards logistics is not what we're here to do.
I just want to reiterate that $17,000 qualifies you for food stamps in the state of Florida. I qualify for food stamps. I get food stamps every month at that pay. It is horrifying to me that a top 5 university allows the state to subsidize how much it pays its workers. That shouldn't be embarrassing to you, after my opinion. It's embarrassing how many people wait in line at the food pantry every week, and then most of them are grad assistants and staff. That's embarrassing. And it's really shameful that UF doesn't seem to be embarrassed by it, and is in fact willing to keep giving us these offers of 3% one-time payments instead of even a 3% increase to the minimum, which at least would be a long-term commitment.
Yeah, and I think actually your slides summarized our motivations pretty well, I'd say, in terms of our reasoning behind how we came to this number. You did mention that we should kind of start on the basis of our mutual interests, and one of the ones that you listed was competitive compensation,
Right.
which I would say that this doesn't qualify.
This doesn't
So I think that would be definitely one mutual interest that would be worth starting the negotiations on.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we're very interested in having the discussion about comparators, because it is something that we looked at, and we looked at a lot of comparators. And I think the way that we look at and value them is something that is probably a multi-session conversation just in and of itself. Because, you know, I appreciate the position of GAU, as I've heard it, is that UF is not offering a competitive wage or plan at all. When we look at what is available, we have a different interpretation, but I think it's important for us to talk about, how did you arrive? You know, let's go through the analysis process of, well, how did you value that versus how do you value this? And which specific comparators are you looking at? And what factors did you account for? And what are the structures and components? And how did you attribute those values? Because I appreciate, and you provided me this stuff from Michigan, and you gave it to me and I read through it, and I was able to independently verify that that's what it was. They are an outlier. They are not, that is not like standard. They are an outlier in the space. They are not like your every average. That is not the standard expectation across the nation.
Right.
It's
So
also what competitive means. It's not that we're going for the average, right?
But and also the expectation again was comparable to cost of living. Even if it's an outlier, the whole idea is we're trying to bring ourselves up to the cost of living, whether it's an outlier or not, it shouldn't matter.
With a similarly ranked school as well, right? We are tied with them at top 4. I mean, and again, even if we're considering comparativeness, USF makes more money now.
UCF
And
as well.
UCF. And again,
USF.
yeah, USF. And again, like I understand Tampa is slightly more expensive than here, but Gainesville's catching up fast, right? So, and these are schools that don't have anywhere near the ranking or prestige as the University of Florida. And then not to mention that if we're comparing University of Florida to Michigan, again, as I mentioned, the legislature has put a halt on the amount of tuition. So UF pays pays a lot more, pays less tuition than these other state universities as well in other states. So you are already paying us less if we factor in one of those comparators, which is tuition remission.
I think the question of how we value this versus how we value our last proposal is we value it in terms of money and currency and what your money can buy in Gainesville, Florida in 2023. And the fact of the matter is our proposal allows you to afford a comfortable, dignified lifestyle in Gainesville, Florida in 2023. And this is simply a 3% raise to an already insultingly low minimum stipend, not even a raise to the minimum. So I really don't appreciate all this runaround language of how do we value this versus this. We value it in ways that make sense and in material ways that are going to impact graduate assistants.
I mean, a 3% increase for the minimum is $510. I just won an award that is giving me $1,000. Like it's literally saying that the service work I do here is going to pay me better than the actual physical work I do at UF. Half as well.
It seems Barbara has their hand raised.
I didn't see that.
Thank you. Yeah, Barbara, did you want to go ahead and speak?
Hi, yes, I'm sorry. The question that was posed before, I was just trying to get more of a clear understanding, kind of to expand that last question of, I guess, why was there or is there such a concerted effort to not increase the stipend from the administrative bargaining team? Like what sort of tenets are sort of around the, I guess, like the obstinance of not wanting to increase it? Is there like, I guess I'm trying to understand, because with all of these like examples and with, of course, tearing down graduate housing and the increase in like inflation, as well as also knowing that a bulk of administrators also have been given a salary increase, I'm just trying to understand like what are the tenets of why there is such a concerted effort to not increase our stipend? What are some of the rationale examples?
Yeah, I would sort of disagree with the question. I think we did actually put an offer on the table that included additional money, and it matched actually what was given across the organization. It wasn't less than, it was the same as. So I sort of disagree with the premise, to be perfectly honest.
It's
Well,
the
I think the
same
question
as
is specifically about,
100%.
yeah, I think the question is
Rebecca.
about stipend. So why specifically is there not an increase in stipend, not generally monies?
10.1 as opposed to 10.3.
Yes, thank you. My question is like, yes, there is not. So why the obstinance with not wanting to increase?
So again, you're saying that you're specifically talking about the minimum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's been our
Yes.
priority with our, every proposal
Yeah.
that we've had is specifically bringing up the minimum as opposed to focusing on the percentage
And
raises
again,
or the flat raises.
You're talking about the fact that salary and faculty had a 3% increase. If I'm sure that was the salary, I'm sure that was not a one-time payment of 3% of their pay.
That's correct.
So why was the same not contributed to us if, again, we're talking about fairness and equity?
At this time, that's what we want to offer based on the authorization that the team has been given.
Matthew, you have your hand up. I don't know if they're away from their screen. Okay. Maybe brief, yeah, and then we can reconvene after we
Well,
discuss.
it's already 2:47.
great.
That's just, I mean, I just. you know.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Can I ask my
Yeah,
question?
Sure, please ask your question.
Okay, thank you. So this is a question for the university bargaining team. I'm looking at a CPI inflation calculator just on the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics website. And I just plugged in $100 for January of 2020. I wanted to see what buying power that has right now. And according to the website, it has buying power of $115. So my question is, how does the university justify not at least increasing our wages in pace with inflation? Because if we have the same salary as 3 years ago, our buying power has decreased. So our quality of life, the purchasing power of our dollars has actually decreased over time.
I'm not aware of any cases that someone has the same salary in GAU that they had 3 years ago.
But the question was, how are you going to account
Yeah.
moving forward for inflation? We all don't make the same amount. But how is the university accounting for inflation with our stipend?
I'm confused as to, I mean, because nobody who was making the same amount in 2020 is making that same amount. I'm not understanding the question.
Has our salary kept pace with inflation, our increases in salary in the past 3 years?
Yeah,
It's decreased.
as we bargain with other groups, this has been a topic and a measuring stick that other groups have used. And we're also aware, and you've shared a lot of data with us over the last few months about the cost of living and inflation. And so at the same time that that is a factor with people's wages, I think we've shared that the university's funding for state-funded appropriated positions was also contracted last year, and that others are also making that same justification increase. And I think that's part of what Patrick's saying. I think the term might have been, I think I saw the term bridge.
Yeah.
A bridge to get to a place where we can talk about how we are prioritizing funding and having more elaborate discussions about where funding is being used and why the university is making this proposal, something that would be important for us, and we hope that you would understand. But just understand that when we engage in conversations, when most every employee, myself, everyone here included, is thinking about the cost of living increasing, that's also a position that many unions across the nation, many employee groups across the nation are thinking about too. But there's an impact that there's not enough money to go around to address that, in terms of saying we're gonna target the cost of inflation as the measurement for how we bargain. Our strategy is different, and I think that's why we need to have more elaborate discussions about how we formulate our proposals and strategy outside of this bridge that's been proposed today.
So I think, to use your language, for this to be like a bridge for us, it would mean that you would have to address the minimum, at least even a little bit, you know.
Because we've
And
made that
all
a
of the
priority.
questions that, as you can see, are about that, for a reason, and for a variety of reasons that have been mentioned. It's cost of living, it's inflation, our competitors. All of those things are important. And obviously, the most important is, like, people shouldn't be going hungry. People should be able to have decent housing, not live in poverty. So yeah, to use your language, the bridge would have to include an increase in it. That is like a real priority.
Okay, I think, so your team has prioritized also having these more robust discussions, and I think before we end the session today and go into our debrief, that we should decide the means or the medium in which we do that, whether that's in the form of a bargaining session, whether that's in the form of informal meetings, because I know that there have been some confusion about the ability to provide us with transparency and documentation, if not at a formal bargaining session. So I just wanted to hear everyone's thoughts about that and how we want to move forward with these robust conversations. Do we want to have a separate medium for this where it is still public but not necessarily a session? Do we want to discuss this more in depth at our next session? I know that with Kat's scheduling, unfortunately, we were only able to narrow down 1 hour sessions for this and next week, and then our longer session being that third week.
I'm fine with doing it then, or if you want to have additional conversations, I mean, I think we're open. We would like to really explore, for example, the comparator conversation. We think that that's really, we'd like to share how we looked at it. We'd like to see how you all looked at it, and then seriously compare notes. And again, it's a lengthy process, but we think there's value in actually comparing those notes in greater detail. Did you look at all the different pieces of their compensation package? Did you look at their terms and conditions of employment? And then let's look at how we value those things.
I am very uncomfortable with the idea of extra meetings on top of bargaining sessions, even if they are public. I would like to remind everyone that you all are paid to be here. You all are paid for your positions. We are not. We are taking time out of our very busy schedules to do this for free. So if we are asking for more time that we then have to spend with you all, not that I don't enjoy spending time with you all, then that is even more time that is lost that we already don't have very much of. And I am very, very, very concerned, based on your presentation and everything I've heard today, that these sessions, whether you want to call them notes comparing or one thing or another, is just going to be us continuing to prove the same points that we've proved over and over again, and you simply saying, well, color of money over and over again. And that's going to be that.
I have a question regarding also the minimum stipend. As I've said before, that this is the main thing that we prioritize for all the reasons that Sikander has mentioned. Is this something that we expected there to be some kind of counteroffer aside from the raise? And I just want to know directly from you all, if this number, considering that this is our current minimum stipend, is this something that you are all willing to change? Or is it that you guys are going to prioritize changing how we're paid via the language in 10.3?
This was our first offer. This is not like a best and final situation.
Right.
That's not where we are.
Right.
And we're early on it. We're early on in bargaining. So, at this point, we're not saying we're not willing to talk about anything, but we're not taking anything off the table in terms of we're not willing to talk about something.
Sure. Okay. Matthew, did you have a question or is your hand still raised from the last?
Oh, that was from before. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Okay, well, we're approaching time. It's 2:54 now, and I don't think there's enough time for us to caucus and come back. So perhaps we'll conclude the meeting here in case anyone has any more things that they want to say, and then we can move forward to our private GAU debrief to discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There goes right then. You see that? It's $13 a week.
For these stuff numbers, yeah.
Okay. See you next. Thank you. Yeah, yes, see you next week. It's so weird having them like right back to back.
We should ask. Non-member, yeah.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Sure, yeah, hold on. Okay, everybody who's on Zoom. Yes. Yeah, you're good. You're totally good. I'm just letting everyone know on Zoom that we're going to clear the room out.
Feeling better?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to overwhelm you. I felt really bad. I had a little bit of winter break and it was the worst. So I'm so sorry.
No worries. It's okay. One second. Everyone on Zoom, we're gonna move to the debrief room in about 5 minutes. We're just clearing out the physical room. And we can, again, keep discussing the proposal that they gave us today. So I'll see members in the GAU debrief room in just a moment.